Welcome back to the channel, guys. So this week it's another Chain of Command and we're returning to the Hurtgen Forest. So last time the British were resoundingly defeated, and so now they're coming back with a little bit more support in the attempt to try and dislodge the Germans and see if they can make some progress. So this time the British platoon has 2 Shermans in support, and the Germans have a heavy machine gun, a Pak-38 and a Marder. The terrain is similar to last time, although they have repositioned to a different area, so this time there is an old barn on the map. High ground on the one side, and the road running along the low ground. The whole site is considered to be forest, so visibility is reduced by half. And all of the stone is providing medium cover. So we start off with our scouting units going out. So the Germans brought their sniper, whilst the British brought 2 of the brain carriers. And the Germans were aiming to get up to that barn as quickly as possible, whilst the British were hoping to capture the ford and get some troops onto the high ground. Again, as soon as they had line of sight on each other, they'd become locked down, and so that was pretty well the end of the scouting phase. The brain carrier on the hill did get immobilized though, unfortunately for him. So turn 1, the Germans came out strong. They brought up a whole section to try and storm up onto the hill, and they brought in their Pak-40 down by the barn. And they also positioned the machine gun inside the barn itself, giving them a good field of fire down onto the British troops who were coming out of the Bren carriers. On the top of the hill, the British section dismounted and started to make their way forwards through the woods to try and get into some good positions so they can fire down onto the Germans. So turn 2, it's going to see the Pak start to have a good bit of action. The Germans carried on their advance to the top of the hill. And at this stage, in the distance, they could just see the British troops starting to move through the field, through the trees in the distance. The British at this stage had brought up a 2nd squad on the hilltop, so they were starting to mass ready for their assault. The Pak did fire and took out the lower Bren carrier, so that was quite a negative point for the British because they lost that support element, but did decide to bring in the Sherman tanks at this stage. I think it would be about time to try and blow the Germans out of their defensive positions and just sort of maintain the initiative. The British down here, although had some cover, were getting chopped to pieces by the German machine gun in the barn. The British forces on the hilltop were pushing forwards, and they could see the Germans and were starting to lay down some good suppressing fire onto them, although casualties were low for the low on both sides actually at this stage. A lot of pin markers, but not many casualties. British brought up their 2nd Sherman this turn, just to try and overwhelm the Germans. Now casualties were starting to mount on both sides. The section down by the stream for the British was already reduced to about half strength at this stage. On the top of the hill, although they had suffered less casualties, they were taking a heck of a lot of pins, and it wasn't looking good for them. Their ability to maneuver was severely reduced. Turn 4 saw the Marder start to appear through the mist in the distance. But along the lines, the Germans brought up a second squad as well to try and push forwards and dislodge the British from the hilltop. The British had brought up their squad sergeant into the centre to try and stabilise that situation also. Germans fired and took out the Sherman, the lead Sherman, unfortunately for the British. So, although the British tank did get a shot off, it just ricocheted straight off, did nothing. On the hilltop, the British were now in a pretty good firing position, both to suppress the Germans down in and around the barn, and also those trying to get over the hilltop. But just the pins that the sections were starting to suffer was really limiting their opportunities. The British did bring up the Piat team this time to try and help deal with the German armour. But we'll see how that pans out shortly. So the German second squad moves up, and they're going to try and flank around to the left of the British. The British mortar popped another smoke to try and provide a bit of cover for their troops. Their right-hand section did break at this point, unfortunately for them. So whilst they were trying to fall back, the central section moved forwards and started trying to hold back the Germans. Turn 7 was a pretty interesting turn. Lots of action going on. So the Sherman and the Marder were firing away at each other, shells pinging off, or going wide entirely. Whilst the Piat team reloaded, fired, missed, reloaded again. On the hill, the Germans kept creeping forwards. Metre by metre, they were taking the ground. Then a lucky shot from the Piat this turn, and took out the Marder. Unfortunately, he was a couple of seconds too late because the Marder had just taken out the second Sherman, but at least it was gone. They then, as fast as possible, tried to hightail it out of there because the remainder of that section had broken and they were pulling out. The German machine gun just kept firing onto them, and yeah, it was making short work of those troops. British leader, section leader in the centre was hit and knocked unconscious, so that was a bad thing. And at this stage, yeah, the British forces just didn't have the numbers or the flexibility left due to pins to be able to actually do anything. They'd lost both Shermans, and they knew their time was nearly up. So turn 8 was more or less now just trying to shore up and try and withdraw without turning into a rout for the British. And for the Germans, it was trying to push forwards and consolidate and take the ground, so that they'd be ready for the next Allied assault. But again, like the previous battle, it was a very hard one. The British seem to have, again, suffered the most. So many pins. Just those German machine guns, they just put so much fire down. It's very hard to be able to maneuver. Perhaps around a slightly larger table, there would be more flexibility and options for flanking. But just as it is, I mean, here you had 2 German machine guns, and with all those shots going down, it's very fast for the British just to become combat ineffective. And your leaders then spend most of their points trying to reduce the pins to be able to get them to start moving or doing stuff again. But as I said, turn 9, and the game was all but over. The Germans down in the bottom were now just sat back, basically, licking their wounds, but they held the position, and they'd only taken a couple of casualties. German machine gun was probably man of the match up on the hill. He was just hitting everyone left, right, and centre. The German troops, The first section, although pinned quite heavily, was still intact. The second took a pounding, but overall they did what they needed to do. So it was a hard battle, but again, British were forced to withdraw. So will there be a third assault? We'll have to wait and see on that one. Maybe they'll try somewhere else. Anyway, thanks for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed. Please like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.